You know that moment when you look at someone else's life on social media and you feel something empty inside you, as if each perfect photo is stealing a piece of your soul, as if each other's achievement proves that you are falling behind in a race you never asked to run. And the worst thing is not the envy you feel. The worst thing is the shame of feeling envious, the guilt of not being able to simply be happy for other people's happiness. And then you close the app, promising never to come back, but 10 minutes later, is it there again, compulsively scrolling, feeding the wound, comparing your messy, imperfect life to the edited, filtered versions of lives you don't even really know? Simone Weil, a French philosopher who lived only 34 years but penetrated more deeply into the mechanisms of human suffering than most do in a lifetime, never knew Instagram or TikTok, but she understood something about the nature of comparison that is even truer today than it was in her time. She understood that when you compare your life to others, you are not just measuring external differences. You are committing an act of violence against your own soul. You are denying the sacred uniqueness of your existence. You are betraying the only path that is truly yours to follow a phantom of a path that could never be yours anyway. And what she discovered about why we do this, about what we are really seeking when we get lost in endless comparisons, will challenge everything you think about self-esteem, purpose, and what it means to live an authentic life. Because Weil realized that comparison is not a character flaw that needs to be corrected with positive affirmations or gratitude exercises. It is a symptom of something much deeper and much more painful. It is the desperate cry of an ego that is terrified of not existing, of not mattering, of not being real. And the only way to truly stop comparing yourself is not to force yourself to stop. It is not to block people on social media or go on digital detox. It is something infinitely more radical and scarier. It is to completely dissolve the part of you that needs to compare yourself in the first place. And if you are feeling something tighten in your chest as you read these words, if a part of you is recognizing a truth that you have avoided looking at directly, then subscribe to this channel now. Because let's dive together into a territory that few have the courage to explore. We will use the brutal and luminous thought of Simone Well to understand why you wasted years of your life in comparisons that never led to anything but more suffering. And most importantly, we will discover the only real way out of this prison, not through psychological tricks or productivity hacks, but through a transformation so profound that you will emerge on the other side as someone who barely recognizes the person you used to be. Someone who has finally stopped measuring your worth against standards that were never yours, and you won't want to miss a beat. Second, to what comes next, because every word here has been chosen to touch exactly the wound you have been avoiding feeling. The wound that, when finally looked at directly, could be the door to a freedom you didn't even know was possible. So take a deep breath, because we will not spare you the pain of looking honestly at what you have done to yourself. But we will also not leave you alone in this darkness. We will go through it together. And Simone Weil, who paid with her own life for the price of seeing the truth without filters, will be our guide on this impossible and necessary journey. You've wasted years. I'm not exaggerating when I say years, not days or weeks, but whole years of your only precious and unrepeatable life, looking at photos of people you barely know, measuring your body against bodies that don't even exist like that in reality, comparing your professional progress with carefully curated trajectories that omit all the failures and luck and invisible privileges, feeling your stomach turn every time someone announces an engagement, a promotion, a trip, an achievement. And the cruelest part is not that you feel envy. The cruelest part is that you then feel ashamed of envy. You judge yourself for not being able to simply be happy. You add guilt on top of pain. You become a prisoner, not just of comparison, but of self-condemnation for comparing. And Simone Weil would say that this is no accident. It is not your weakness. It is a trap perfectly constructed by what she called the ego. That part of you that believes you need to prove your existence through external validation, through being better than, more beautiful than, more successful than, as if your worth was something that could be measured, quantified, ranked, as if you were a product competing in the market instead of a unique and unrepeatable human being trying to find your own path in a world that insists on offering only pre-made paths. And deep down you know that this constant comparison is slowly killing you. It is stealing your joy, your creativity, your ability to simply be present in your own life instead of always evaluating how your life compares to the imaginary lives of others. But knowing this doesn't change anything, because comparison is not a conscious choice you make. It is compulsion. It is addiction. It is the way your ego has learned to try to feel real, and the more you try stop, the more you compare. The more you promise yourself that you will stop checking social media, the more you find yourself there again. And every time you give in, every time you open that app knowing exactly what you are going to feel, you lose a little more respect for yourself. You confirm to yourself that you have no willpower, that you are weak, that you are pathetic, and this narrative of self-condemnation becomes one more thing to compare. Now you are not just comparing external achievements, you are comparing your own discipline, your inner strength, your ability to control, and you always lose out in this comparison. Because the game is rigged from the beginning. Because you are measuring yourself against idealized versions that not even the owners of these lives can reach. You are competing with ghosts, with carefully constructed illusions, with lies so well told that even those who tell them start to believe them. And here's what no one tells you about comparison. What Simone Weil saw with brutal clarity. Comparison isn't about the other person, it never has been. When you look at someone's life and feel that pang of inadequacy, that feeling of being left behind, you're not really seeing that person's life. You're projecting your own insecurities, your own fears, your own fantasies about what it would mean to be enough, to be complete, to finally be free from the constant anxiety of not being enough. The person you envy doesn't even. It exists as you imagine it. It is a construction of your mind. It is a blank canvas on which you project everything that you believe is missing in you. And when you understand this, you really understand it on a visceral level and not just an intellectual one. When you realize that you have spent years fighting ghosts that you yourself created, something inside you breaks, because it means that all that suffering, all those wasted hours, all that energy spent on feeling inferior was based on illusion, was self-inflicted, was you torturing yourself with stories that your own mind invented. And this realization should be liberating. But at first it only increases the pain, because now you can no longer blame other people. You can no longer say it's their fault for posting their perfect lives. You have to look in the mirror and recognize that you chose, repeatedly, every day, to feed this wound. You chose to open the apps. You chose to scroll. You chose to compare. And Weil would not let you escape this painful responsibility. She would force you to look directly at the role you played in your own prison, not to make you feel guilt, but because without this brutal honesty, there is no real possibility of freedom. You have to first recognize that it is you who is locking the door from the inside. You have to feel the full weight of your complicity in your own suffering. And only then, only when you have completely stopped projecting responsibility outward, only when you have taken full ownership of the wound, can you begin the real work of healing, but not healing in the sense of fixing or improving. Healing in the sense of completely transforming your relationship with the very need to compare, and that, Weil would say, is work. Of a lifetime, it is not something that you resolve in a weekend of spiritual retreat or in 10 therapy sessions. It is the slow and painful deconstruction of the entire ego structure that you spent decades building. It is the death of who you thought you needed to be finally be able to exist as who you really are. But before we can understand how to get out of this trap, we need to go even deeper. We need to understand not just what you are doing when you compare, but why. What is the real hunger you are trying to satisfy with these endless comparisons? Because Weil discovered something disturbing. She discovered that behind every comparison, there is a void, a black hole at the center of your being that is constantly sucking energy, attention, life, trying to fill itself with external validation, with proof of worth, with evidence that you exist and matter, and that void cannot be filled, it can never be filled, because it is not really empty. It is the illusion of emptiness created by the ego. It is the feeling of incompleteness that the ego manufactures to justify its own existence. Because if you felt complete exactly as you are, you would, and you didn't need anything else to feel valuable. The ego would have no function. It wouldn't be necessary. And the ego will fight with all its strength not to become unnecessary. So it creates this insatiable hunger, this constant need for more, for better, for different. It convinces you that you will only be happy when you achieve that goal, when you look that way, when you have that achievement, and when you finally achieve it. The happiness lasts for a few days or a few hours, and then the emptiness returns, even greater, because now you have achieved what you thought you was going to complete you, and you still feel incomplete. So clearly the problem must be that you haven't achieved enough. You need the next goal, the next achievement, the next transformation. And the cycle never ends, can never end, because you are trying to fill something that doesn't exist. You are trying to satisfy a hunger that the very act of trying to satisfy only increases. And Simone Weil lived this in her own flesh. She was the sister of Weil, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of the 20th century. And as a child, she constantly compared herself to him. She felt stupid, inadequate, less than. She described this pain in her journals, the agony of growing up in the shadow of someone so exceptional, and this wound shaped her entire philosophy. Because she knew intimately the pain of comparison. She knew how it eats away at the soul from the inside out, how it stops you from seeing your own unique value, how it turns life into a competition you never asked to enter but can't stop running. And what she discovered through years of suffering and deep contemplation was that the only way to stop is not to win the competition. It's not finally being better than others. It's recognizing that the entire competition is a farce. It's theater created by the ego to keep you trapped, to prevent you from waking up to your own true nature that doesn't need comparison, that can't be measured, that simply is. And waking up to this is not a single event. It's not sudden enlightenment. It's a painful and long process of dying over and over again to the version of you that you believe needs to be special, better, recognized, and each death hurts. Each time you let go of a part of the identity built on comparisons, you feel as if you are losing something essential, as if you are becoming less rather than more. But Weil would promise that on the other side of this death, there is birth. There is the possibility of existing in ways you have never experienced, free from the constant need to measure and be measured, free to simply be. And now let's go to the darkest place, to the first real descent into the abyss that is comparison. Because until now we have only been on the surface, recognizing pain and beginning to understand mechanisms. But to really free yourself, you need to look directly at what happens to your soul when you compare yourself. You need to fully feel the damage that is being done, because only total awareness of the wound allows true healing. And the first brutal truth that Simone Well would force you to face is this: every time you compare yourself to someone, you commit small suicide spiritual. You deny your own unique existence in favor of a standardized version of success that can never be yours because it was created by and for someone else. When you look at someone's life on social media and think, I should be in that place, I should look that way, I should have achieved that, you are implicitly saying that who you are and where you are is not enough, not valid, not real. You are erasing your own journey, your own choices, your own unique circumstances, and replacing all of that with fantasy about how life should be based on carefully selected fragments of life of another person. And this act of self-denial is violent. It is destructive. It is a form of self-rejection so deep that if it became conscious, it would be unbearable. So you keep it unconscious. You don't realize that every comparison is a declaration that you are not good enough as you are. You simply feel the result. The chronic anxiety, the constant dissatisfaction, the feeling of never being enough no matter how much you achieve. And Weil would say that this is exactly the trap. The ego keeps you unaware of what you are doing, because if you clearly saw the damage, saw how much of your own life you are sacrificing, on the altar of external standards that mean nothing, you would have to stop. You wouldn't be able to continue. It would be like watching someone cutting themselves repeatedly and not being able to look the other way. Except in this case, the person cutting themselves is you. And when you finally see yourself doing it, when consciousness illuminates the pattern, the pain increases before it subsides, because now you can no longer do it unconsciously. Now every time you pick up your phone to check social media, you exactly know what you are about to do to yourself. And at first you do it anyway, because habit is stronger than conscience. But slowly, painfully slowly, conscience begins to change behavior. You begin to hesitate, you begin to question, you begin to choose differently. Not every day, not every time, but sometimes. And these moments of choosing differently are seeds of freedom. They are first steps out of the prison that you have built with your own hands through 1,000 daily comparisons, 1,000 small denials of your own worth, 1,000 acts of violence against your own soul. Let me tell you about Maria. It's not her real name, but it's a story. Maria was 32 years old when she finally admitted to herself that she had wasted the entire last decade in comparisons. She worked in digital marketing, so she was constantly on social media. It was part of the job, or at least it was an excuse she gave herself. But the truth is that even when she wasn't working, she was scrolling, comparing, judging herself. She saw colleagues being promoted and felt failure. She saw friends getting married and felt inadequacy. She saw influencers traveling and felt envy. And the worst thing is that she had an objectively good life, a job that paid well, a stable relationship, friends who cared, health. But none of that mattered, because she was always measuring herself against something else, always feeling like she should be in a different place, be a different person, have achieved more, and she tried all the superficial solutions. She did digital detox for a week, but came back even more addicted. She deleted apps, but reinstalled them the same day. She started following only inspiring accounts, but discovered that even positive messages made her feel inadequate, because the people posting seemed to have discovered a secret to happiness that she didn't have. And it was only when she finally stopped trying to fix the problem externally and started looking internally, when she asked not how to stop seeing other people's posts, but why she needed to compare herself in the first place, that something began to change. And the answer she found was terrifying in its simplicity. She compared herself because she didn't know who she was without comparison. Her entire identity was built on being better or worse than others. She had no sense of self that existed independently of external measurement. And realizing this was like having the ground removed from under her feet, because it meant that she would have to build a whole new identity from scratch. She would have to discover who she was when she stopped defining herself in relation to others. And this process of discovery is exactly what Simone Weil called decreation. It is the dissolution of the constructed ego, of the fabricated self through comparisons and judgments, to allow something truer to emerge. And Maria couldn't do it alone. She needed help. She needed time. She needed a lot of pain. But she slowly began to experience moments of existence without comparison. Moments where you were simply present in your own life without evaluating whether it was enough. And these moments were at the same time liberating and terrifying. Liberating because there was finally peace. Terrifying because when you stop comparing yourself, you also stop having an excuse for not living fully. You can no longer say that you will be happy when you achieve that or look like that. You have to choose to be happy or unhappy now with what you have, with who you are. And this responsibility is scary because it removes all future hope that kept you going. It removes the fantasy that one day, when you finally, if it's good enough, everything will make sense, and you have to face the possibility that maybe nothing will ever make sense. Maybe there will be no point of arrival where you finally feel complete. Maybe life is simply this imperfect and confusing moment, and you can choose to inhabit it fully, or you can choose to keep escaping into comparisons and fantasies, but you can no longer pretend you're not choosing. The second descent into the abyss of comparison is even deeper and more painful because it involves recognizing not just the damage you do to yourself, but the damage you do to others. Because Simone Weil understood that comparison is not an isolated act that affects only you. It is an act of violence that ripples out to everyone around you. When you look at someone just as a point of comparison, as a measure of your own success or failure, you dehumanize them. You stop seeing them as a complete and complex person and start seeing them only as a rival or a threat or inspiration or model. You reduce their humanity to function in your personal narrative, and that destroys the possibility of real connection, of real love, of true friendship, because you can't love someone who is using you as a yardstick to measure yourself. You can't be friends with someone who secretly resents you for having what you want. You can't have real, authentic engagement with anyone while constantly evaluating whether they are better or worse than you on some arbitrary dimension. And the most tragic thing is that people feel this. They may not articulate it consciously, but they feel it when you are not really present with them, when you are using them as a mirror for your own insecurities. And this creates distance, isolation, the feeling that no one really sees you or knows you. But in fact, you are the one who is not seeing or knowing anyone. You are so absorbed in comparisons that you have completely lost the capacity for pure attention that Weil considered the essence of love. Attention without the desire to change or use or compare. Simply attention to the other as they really are. And when you realize how much damage you have done to your relationships through constant comparison, when you see clearly all the moments of connection you missed because you were busy measuring instead of being present, the guilt can be overwhelming. You want to go back in time and do things differently. You want to apologize to all the people you reduced to points of comparison. But Weil would remind you that guilt is just another form of ego. It is you putting yourself at the center again, doing about yourself and your failure instead of about others and how you can honor them now, in the present. And the only way to truly honor someone is to stop using them as an instrument for your own drama of self-evaluation. It is to start seeing them in all their uniqueness and complexity. It is to practice pure attention even when ego is screaming at you to compare, to judge, to evaluate. And this practice is incredibly difficult because it goes against everything you have been conditioned to do. Entire society trains us from childhood to compare, to compete. To measure our worth against others, grades in school are based on comparison. Jobs are given based on being a better candidate. Romantic relationships are about being chosen above others. Everything is competition. Everything is ranking. Everything is about being better than. And then they tell you to just stop comparing yourself as if it's a simple matter of changing your mindset. But it's not. It's a complete dismantling of the operating system that you've been using to navigate the world for as long as you can remember. And doing that while still living in this world that values comparison and competition above all else is like trying to swim against the current that never stops. You get exhausted, you want to give up. You wonder why you're doing this when everyone around you seems perfectly comfortable playing the game. And the answer Weil would give is simple but brutal. Because you can no longer live in the lie. Because once you've seen the truth about comparison and the damage it causes, you can't not see it. You are irrevocably changed, and you can choose between living up to the truth you've seen or living in constant betrayal of yourself. And betrayal of yourself hurts more than anything, so you keep going. You practice. Attention to others. You notice when you are comparing and gently return to simple presence. You fail 1,000 times, but you keep trying because the alternative is slow death of the soul, is to become increasingly cynical, bitter, isolated. And you already know this path. You have already experienced where it leads. So even when everything seems impossible, you continue, not because you have blind faith that it will work, but because there is really no other choice that you can live with. And before we go into the third and deepest descent, I need to pause for a moment and ask you something. From where are you watching this video right now? From which corner of the world are you seeking an answer to this specific suffering of comparison that steals years from your life? Leave in the comments your city, your country, because there is something profoundly powerful in knowing that at this exact moment there are people in São Paulo, in Lisbon, in Maputo, in Luanda, in every place where Portuguese is spoken and far beyond, all struggling with the same wound, all trying to find their way out of this prison of constant comparison. And Simone Weil, who died so young but left a legacy that continues to touch souls decades later, would be touched to know that her words continue to reach those who truly need them. So tell me, from where you watch us, because you are not alone on this journey even when it seems like you are. And now, knowing that there are others walking this same painful but necessary path, we can finally descend to the deepest level of the abyss, to the place where Simone Weil found not just truth about comparison, but truth about the nature of human existence in yourself. Because deep down, comparison is not really about others. It's not about you. It's about primordial fear of not existing, of not mattering, of not having intrinsic value. It's about terror that if you're not special, if you're not better at something, then maybe you're nothing. Maybe you are just one among billions, insignificant, forgettable, without purpose. And this terror is so unbearable that you do anything to avoid it. You compare yourself compulsively because at least when you are comparing, you exist in relation to something. You have position on the map, even if it is inferior position. You are something, even if that something is not enough. Because being not enough is still better than being nothing, or at least that is what ego convinces you. But Weil saw through this illusion. She saw that the fear of being nothing is created by the very act of trying to be something through comparison. You create the problem that you then try to solve through more comparisons. It is a perfect and vicious cycle, and the only way out, the only true way out, is to stop trying to be something and allow yourself to be nothing. Not nothing in the sense of annihilation, but nothing in the sense of non-thing, of existence that cannot be measured, classified, compared, because it has no fixed form, no defined boundaries. It simply is. And that is so vast and so simple that ego cannot understand. Ego. It needs definition. It needs limit. It needs comparison to orient itself. So he interprets this invitation to be nothing as a threat of death, and in a way it is. It is death of the ego as you know it. But Weil would promise that on the other side of that death, there is life fuller than you have ever experienced, trapped in the prison of constant comparisons and self-evaluations. There is freedom to simply exist without justification, without proof, without the need for external validation. And this freedom is at the same time the simplest and most impossible thing in the world. Simple, because it is your natural state. It is how you were before you learned to compare yourself. Is how you still are underneath all the layers of conditioning. Impossible, because getting there requires dismantling every belief you have about who you are and what makes you valuable. It requires dying to identity built through decades of comparisons and judgments, and no one dies willingly. No one lets go easily. You will fight. You will resist. You will try to find a shortcut, but there is no shortcut. There is only the long and painful path through the abyss. Through total acceptance that comparison has never gotten you anywhere except more suffering. Through the brutal recognition that years have been lost, life has been wasted, and there is no way to get that time back. There is only the possibility of not losing anymore, of stopping now, today, this moment, and starting to live differently. Not perfectly, not without relapses, but with a clear direction out of the prison towards something you still can't fully imagine but can feel calling from a place deep within you, a place you always knew comparison was a trap, but didn't have the language or courage to name that truth until now. So what Simone Weil saw when she looked directly into the abyss of comparison, when she completely stopped trying to escape or solve or fix and simply observed with undivided attention the mechanism of suffering, she saw that comparison is fundamentally about misdirected love. It is love that should be directed at yourself, at others, at life as it is, being distorted and channeled into the impossible project of becoming something you are not, of reaching a standard that has nothing to do with your true nature. And when you understand that comparison is distorted love, not hate or envy or weakness, but love that has been perverted by the ego into an instrument of self-torture, everything changes. Because now you can begin to work with the energy of love instead of fighting the energy of comparison. You can begin to redirect that love, not through force or discipline, but through understanding. When you find yourself comparing, you can ask, what love is trying to express here? What am I really seeking in this comparison? And the answer is always the same. You are seeking to feel valuable, loved, enough. You are seeking peace of finally accepting yourself. But you are searching in the wrong place. You are searching through proving that you are better than others, or at least not worse. And that can never work, because even when you overcome comparison today, tomorrow there will be new comparison and you will have to prove yourself again. It is work that never ends. But when you redirect love to yourself directly, without the need for comparison as a mediator, when you simply allow yourself to be loved exactly as you are in this imperfect and confusing moment, something extraordinary happens. The emptiness that you were trying to fill with external validation turns out to be no real emptiness, but sacred space, space where you can rest, where you don't have to prove anything, where you can simply be. And that being without performance, without comparison, without judgment, is what Weil called a state of grace. It is not something you achieve through effort, but something you allow through stopping resisting, and allowing is infinitely and more difficult than doing. Because doing gives you a feeling of control, that you are progressing, that you are on the way to somewhere. But allowing requires total surrender, requires accepting that you cannot save yourself through comparisons, through becoming better, through finally reaching that impossible standard. You can only be saved through completely stopping trying and allowing life to hold you exactly as you are, with all your imperfections, with all your failures, with all the ways you don't live up to the idealized images you carry in your mind. And that surrender is not defeat. It is the deepest victory possible. It is victory over the ego that has held you prisoner through endless comparisons. It is release from the need to be special, to feel valuable. It is the discovery that you have always been valuable, not because you are better than someone else or because you have achieved something, but simply because you exist, because you are a unique expression of life that has never existed before and will never exist again. And that uniqueness needs no proof, no need for validation, no need for comparison. It simply is. And when you finally see it, when you see not only understand intellectually, but see with your whole being, comparison becomes impossible, not because you are forcing yourself to stop, but because there is no one else to compare. There is only you, unique and unrepeatable, walking your own path that no one else can walk, and that path may be harder or easier than others' paths. But these categories stop making sense because each path is incomparable. Each life is its own complete universe, and you cannot measure universes against each other. You can only inhabit them fully or partially, and choose, it's always yours. And this discovery by Simone Well, this understanding that comparison is distorted love, and that liberation comes not from stopping comparing, but from redirecting love towards your own unique existence, is not cheap consolation, is not new age optimism, is something much more radical and much truer, because what she saw at the bottom of this pain reveals something about the nature of human existence that changes everything, reveals that suffering caused by comparison is not an accident. It is not a bug in the system. It is an inevitable consequence of living in a society that teaches us from birth that value is relative, that it matters to the extent that you are better than others, that your life only has meaning if you stand out, and this conditioning is so deep, so pervasive, that most people never question it. They simply accept it and spend their entire lives trying to win a game that was never designed to be won. Because even when you reach the top of a hierarchy, there is always another hierarchy, always another comparison, always another standard to reach, and you can spend your entire life jumping from one to another, collecting achievements, accumulating validations, but in the end, you will look back and realizing that you never lived your own life. You lived a version of life that was approved by others, validated by external standards, measured by metrics that never made sense to you, but that you never questioned because you were too busy trying to live up to it. And that realization, when it comes, is devastating. It's realizing that you wasted your one precious life trying to be someone you're not, trying to achieve things that you didn't really want, but that you thought you should want, because that's what everyone else wanted. And Weil doesn't give you an easy way to avoid this devastation. It forces you to fully feel the weight of what has been lost, because only when you fully feel the pain of life wasted in comparison can you truly choose to live differently. Only when you touch the bottom of the abyss can you begin to climb, and the climb is not about making up for lost time or righting past mistakes. It is about simply starting now, today, to live with attention, with presence, with awareness that every moment you spend comparing is a moment you are not living. Every second spent evaluating whether you are enough is a second stolen from the only life you have. And when you really understand this, when a sense of urgency sets in, not as anxiety, but as clarity, you stop putting it off, stop waiting until you are ready or until you achieve it. You simply start, imperfect and scared and insecure, but starting anyway, because alternatively, continuing as you are has become unbearable. You have seen very clearly where this path leads. You can no longer pretend that everything is fine, that comparisons are harmless, that one day you will stop naturally. You know now that you won't. You know that you will continue until you die, unless make a conscious and repeated choice to stop, and make that choice every day, sometimes every hour, sometimes every minute when anxiety is high and the temptation to check social media is strong. It's the hardest work you'll ever do, but it's also the only work that really matters. Because it's the work of reclaiming your own life, of rescuing your soul from the grip of endless comparisons, of finally allowing yourself to exist without excuses, without justifications, without the need to prove that you deserve the space you occupy in this world. Because Weil would remind you that you don't need to deserve it. You already deserve it simply by existing. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop trying to earn what is already rightfully yours, the sooner you can. Start living the life that is waiting for you on the other side of all these comparisons. A life that you can't even imagine yet because you are so used to living in prison that you don't know what the open sky is like, but it is there, waiting. And each time you choose attention over comparison, each time you allow yourself to be imperfect without judgment, each time you look at another human being and see a complete person instead of a point of comparison, you are taking a step towards that freedom. Small step perhaps, but a real step, and steps accumulate. Choices become habits, and one day you will realize that you have gone a whole day without comparing yourself once, and at first it will be scary because who you are without comparison, how you orient yourself in the world without this constant metric. But then scary becomes liberating because you realize that you don't need to orient yourself in the old way. You can just be, you can just live. And that is enough, more than enough, that's all. But this discovery by Simone Well is not the end of the story. It is not the point where you arrive and can rest forever in peace, because comparison has such deep roots in human consciousness that you are never completely free from it. What changes is not that comparisons stop arising, but that your relationship with them changes. You develop the ability to observe comparison happening without identifying with it, without believing in it, without allowing it to dictate your value or your choices. And this capacity, this ability to witness your own mental patterns without being dominated by them, is exactly what Weil called attention. And attention is practice, not a permanent state. You have to cultivate it every day. You have to strengthen that muscle of awareness through repeated use. And some days you will be capable of deep attention, of watching comparisons arise and dissolve without adherence. And other days, you will be completely identified, completely lost in dramas of who is better and who is falling behind. And that's okay. That's also part of the process. The important thing is not perfection, but direction. It's not never comparing again, but comparing less and less intensely, less compulsively, with more awareness and less adherence. And to develop this capacity for attention, you need concrete practice. You need something that you can do every day that reminds you to return to yourself, to return to awareness, to return to presence instead of living on the automatic pilot of habitual comparisons. And that is what we are going to explore now. not as a list of steps that guarantee success, because there are no guarantees on this path, but as a set of practices that Simone Weil developed and that can serve as a map for your own journey of liberation. Practices that will not get you magically heal, but that can slowly, painfully create enough space between you and your comparisons so that you can begin to live a life that is truly yours rather than a distorted reflection of the lives of others. The first practice is to wake up and, before anything else, before picking up the phone, before checking messages, before starting to plan the day, dedicate just 10 minutes to observe your mind in a natural state. Sit in silence, keep your eyes open or closed as you prefer, and simply notice what thoughts arise. It is not meditation in the sense of trying to empty the mind or reach a special state. It is simply the practice of observation, of seeing clearly how your mind works when you are not trying to control or direct it. And inevitably, probably in the first few minutes, comparisons will arise. You will remember something you saw yesterday on social media. You will begin to compare yourself. You will feel that familiar pang of inadequacy or envy or judgment. And here is the practice. Instead of following that thought, instead of working out the story, instead of allowing it to take you into a spiral of self-evaluation, you simply notice, you say to yourself mentally, comparison has arisen, and then you return to simple observation. You don't judge yourself for comparing. You don't try to force the thought to stop. You simply acknowledge its presence and return to a state of open attention, and you will have to do this dozens of times in 10 minutes, maybe hundreds, because the mind is used to comparing. It is its default pattern. But each time you notice and return, each time you practice this movement of disidentification, you are weakening the pattern slightly. You are creating little space between yourself and comparison. And that space, however small, is the beginning of freedom. It is recognition that you are not your comparisons. You are awareness that can watch comparisons come and go, and Weil would call this the practice of morning decreation. Because you are starting the day not by reinforcing ego through planning and worry and comparison, but by slightly dissolving the ego through pure attention, and don't expect this practice to be easy or pleasurable. Most days it will be boring or frustrating, or it will seem like a waste of time. But Weil would remind you that the most important practices are rarely pleasurable. They are necessary, and you don't do them because you like it, but because you clearly saw that the alternative, living on the automatic pilot of constant comparisons, is unbearable. The second practice is, whenever you catch yourself comparing during the day, stop everything you are doing for just 30 seconds and ask 3 simple questions. First, what real need am I trying to meet with this comparison? Not the superficial need to be better, but the deep need underneath. Usually it is the need to feel valuable, loved, enough, or safe. Second question, can this comparison actually meet that need? And the answer is always no. Comparison can never make you feel truly valuable, because even when you overcome one comparison, there is always another. But asking the question forces you to see futility of behavior. And third question, what could I do now that would actually meet that need? And the answer is always some form of self-acceptance, of compassion for yourself, of recognition of your own value, independent of comparison. It could be as simple as putting your hand on your heart and saying silently, I am enough as I am. Or it could be doing something that makes you feel connected to yourself. Walking, writing, creating something, anything that takes you out of evaluation mode and puts you into expression mode. And again, don't expect this to be easy. The first 100 times you try to ask these questions, you probably won't be able to answer them honestly. Ego will interfere, give you shallow answers, or make you feel stupid for asking. But you keep practicing. You keep asking, because every time you ask, you are interrupting the automatic cycle of comparison. You are inserting moments of awareness into an unconscious pattern. And these moments of awareness are seeds that eventually grow into a real ability to choose differently, to see comparison emerging and choose not to follow it, not because you are forcing yourself, but because you saw it so clearly. That it doesn't lead anywhere, that following is no longer an option. The third practice is more difficult and more important. It is the practice of paying attention to others whenever you are with someone, whether in person or on a call, or even reading a post on social media. making a conscious effort to see that person as a complete and complex person instead of as a point of comparison, means resisting the habitual impulse to evaluate, judge, measure, and instead simply observe. See the expression on their face. Listen to their tone of voice. Notice gestures. Pay attention to what they are actually saying instead of staying in your head planning what you are going to say next or comparing their experience with yours. And Weil would say that this pure attention to the other is the highest form of love. It is love that seeks nothing in return, that does not project its own needs onto the other, that simply allows another to exist in all of its reality. And when you practice this attention, you notice something extraordinary. You realize that in the moment of true attention, comparison is impossible, because comparison requires you to reduce another to a category, to a set of characteristics that can be measured against your own. But when you are really seeing someone, really present with them, you see uniqueness that cannot be categorized or measured. You see the mystery of another consciousness, another complete universe inhabiting the human body, and in the face of this mystery, comparison proves absurd. You can no longer ask who is better or who has more because categories cease to make sense. There are only two unique human beings existing side by side, each on their own path. And this experience of pure attention needs to be practiced repeatedly, because the habitual pattern of comparison is strong. You will constantly slip back into evaluation mode. You will find yourself judging, categorizing, measuring. But each time you notice and return attention, each time you choose to see instead of evaluate, you are strengthening your ability to be present, to truly love, to connect. Reality that is not mediated by comparisons and judgments. And ironically, when you stop comparing yourself to others, you can finally have real relationships with them. You can finally know them and be known. You can finally come out of the loneliness that comparison creates, because comparison always isolates you, always puts you in a position of competition or judgment instead of connection. But attention connects you. It reminds you that you are all on this human journey together, all struggling, all suffering, all trying to find your way. And in this shared humanity, comparisons lose meaning because there is nothing to compare. There is only human experience in all its infinite forms. The fourth practice is to write once a week a letter to your own compulsion to compare, not a letter of hate or condemnation, but a letter of curiosity and compassion. Begin with, "Dear Comparison," and then honestly explore what you get from it, what false comfort it offers, what fear it is trying to protect you from feeling, what fantasy it is keeping alive. Write without editing, without judging, simply allowing the truth to flow. And in the end, thank the comparison for what it tried to do. Recognize that it was a misdirected attempt to keep you safe, to give you a sense of self, to make you feel that you exist and matter, and then tell her that you no longer need her in that way, that you have found or are finding other ways to meet those needs, ways that don't hurt, that don't limit, that don't trap you in an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. And this practice may seem silly or artificial at first, but Weil deeply believed in being able to name and dialogue with internal patterns instead of simply trying to suppress them, because when you suppress something, it goes into the shadows and continues to operate unconsciously. But when you bring it to light, when you dialogue with him, when you understand his motivations and his role, you can begin to transform your relationship with him. You can begin to be grateful for what he tried to do while choosing to no longer operate that way. And writing these weekly letters creates a record of your own journey. You can look back and see how your relationship with comparison has changed over the months. See patterns that repeat themselves. See moments of insight or breakthrough. And this record becomes a source of encouragement in difficult times. Proof that change is possible even when it seems impossible. The fifth practice is to create a daily ritual of recognition. Before bed, internally name or briefly write down 3 things. First, a moment today where you caught yourself comparing, not to judge yourself but to maintain pattern awareness. Second, a moment where you chose different, where you noticed the impulse to compare and chose attention instead, even if only for seconds. Third, A thing about yourself or your life that you appreciate that has nothing to do with being better than someone else, something intrinsically valuable. It could be the ability to feel deeply. It could be the way light enters. In your room in the morning, it could be the sound of laughter from someone you love. Anything that connects you with value that is not relative, that simply is. And this ritual is not about cultivating forced positivity. It is about training the mind to see what has always been true, but that comparisons have prevented you from seeing. That your life has value regardless of how it compares to the lives of others. That there is beauty and meaning in your experience that cannot be measured or classified. And the more you practice this recognition, the more you direct attention to aspects of life that exist outside of hierarchies, of comparison, the more you begin to inhabit a different reality. A reality where you can finally relax, can finally stop proving, can finally simply be. And Weil would call this reality grace, not because it is given by external force, but because it can only be received when you create space through letting go of the need for comparison, through emptying yourself of the ego that needs to be special to feel valuable. And that empty space is not absence, but presence. It is not less but more. It is fullness that does not depend on having or being or achieving, but simply on being, completely, no reservations, no comparisons, no judgments, just being. And that is the freedom that Weil spent a lifetime seeking and eventually finding, not as a permanent state, but as a possibility always available when you choose to stop running, stop comparing, stop trying to be someone you are not, and simply allow yourself to be exactly who you are. Here, now, imperfect and messy and yet complete. And now, having walked this journey together through the pain of comparison, through the brutal truth about what it does to your soul, through the concrete practices that can help you begin to free yourself, there is only one thing left: to recognize the courage it took for you to reach this point. It's here, to look directly at the wound instead of continuing to run away, because watching this entire video, allowing these words to touch your deepest fears about not being enough, is an act of bravery that most people will never have. Most people prefer to continue in the comfortable illusion that if they just achieve the next goal, if they just manage to look that way, if they just are a little better, then they will finally be happy. But you saw through that illusion. You recognize that comparison is a trap that never leads to the place it promises, and that recognition is already transformation. It's already a different start to life, because now you can no longer do unconsciously what you did before. Now every comparison comes with awareness of the cost, of the time you're wasting, of the life you're wasting, and that awareness, however uncomfortable it may be, is present. It's a call to wake up, to stop living on autopilot and start making real choices about how you want to spend your precious and limited days on this planet. And Simone Well, if she could speak to you now, she wouldn't offer words of empty encouragement or promises that it will be easy. She would be honest, as she always was. She would say that you chose a difficult path, a path of consciousness in a world that values unconsciousness, a path of uniqueness in a society that demands conformity, a path of self-acceptance in a culture based on infinite self-improvement. And that path will be lonely at times. It will always be painful. It will make you question whether it is worth it. But the alternative, returning to the comfortable prison of constant comparisons, has become impossible because you have seen a lot. You know a lot. You cannot undo the awareness you have acquired, even if you sometimes wish you could, so you keep going. Not because you are sure it will work, but because there is really no other choice that you can live with. You keep going because every day that you choose attention over comparison, presence over evaluation, self-acceptance over self-judgment, you are reclaiming little piece of your own life. You are stealing back moments that comparison had stolen from you. You are slowly building capacity to exist with no need for external validation, no need to be better than, just need to be, simply, completely. And the more you practice that being simple, but you realize that this is what you were looking for all along through all those comparisons. Not proof that you are special, but permission to be ordinary. not evidence that you are better, but acceptance that you are enough, not attainment of position at the top, but discovery that there is no top. There is just this moment, this breath, this life happening now, and you can choose to be present for it, or you can choose to remain lost in endless comparisons with lives you will never live. And if you felt during this video that something has changed, that some truth resonated so deeply that you can no longer pretend not to know, so leave a like now, because this simple gesture shows me that these words are reaching those who really need them, those who have the courage to look at their own pain instead of continuing to run away. And subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together, because you are not alone on this difficult but necessary path of waking up to your own life. There are others walking too, others who have seen through the illusion of comparison and are learning to live differently. And together we can create a community not of competition, but of mutual witness, of shared recognition that we are all struggling, all suffering, all trying to find our way to authenticity in a world that values performance, and to have company on that journey, to know that there are others trying the same practices, facing the same resistances, celebrating the same small victories, makes it all more bearable, makes it possible to keep going even when it seems impossible. So join us, like, subscribe, become part of this community of people who have chosen to wake up, who have chosen to stop comparing, who have chosen to live their own lives rather than approved versions of lives that they were never theirs to begin with. The comparison you feel is not a defect in your character. It is not a weakness that needs to be corrected with more effort or more discipline. It is a symptom of the human condition in a society that teaches you from birth that value is relative, that you only matter if you are better. And Simone Weil discovered that deep down in this comparison, when you completely stop running away from it, when you inhabit it like someone inhabiting an open wound of your own, something impossible can happen. You don't stop feeling the impulse to compare, but you stop believing in it. The comparison becomes just a passing thought, not the truth. About its value, not command you need to obey. Just mental phenomenon that arises and passes like a cloud in the sky, and in the space created by this non-identification, in this moment of freedom between impulse and action, you can choose. You can choose attention over comparison. You can choose presence over judgment. You can choose simply to be, rather than constantly evaluating whether you are being enough. And these choices accumulate, moment by moment, day by day, until one day you realize that you have gone an entire week without getting lost in comparisons. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because it genuinely hasn't occurred to you to compare. You were too busy living your own life, present to your own experience. And when comparison eventually arises again, because it always does, you recognize it immediately. Smile at it as an old acquaintance who no longer has power over you, and return to what you were doing. And that is freedom that Weil offers, not freedom from ever having the thought of comparison, but freedom from not being dominated by it, not being defined by it, not losing more years of your life to it. And you are not alone on this journey. Simone Well walked before you. She faced the same demons of comparison and inadequacy that you face. She fought with the same questions about value and meaning, and she found a way through, not an easy way, not a way that avoids pain, but a way that goes directly through pain and emerges on the other side transformed. And that way is available to you too. Now, today, this moment. You can start, you can make the choice to stop comparing for just the next 5 minutes. You can practice paying attention to your own experience without judgment for just the next hour. You can experience being present in your own life without measuring it against the lives of others for just the next day. And these periods of freedom, however brief, show you that it is possible, that there is life on the other side of constant comparisons. A life that is richer, fuller, more truly yours than any life you could build by trying to live up to external standards. And every time you taste that freedom, even for moments, it becomes more difficult to go back to prison. It becomes more obvious that comparison was always a cage that you built yourself, and that you can, at any moment, choose to leave. Simone Weil lived only 34 years, But in that short time, she saw more deeply into the nature of human suffering than most dare in a lifetime. She found no cure for the pain of existing in a world that constantly compares and classifies us, but she found dignity. She found a way to carry that pain without being destroyed by it. She found a way to go through comparisons and judgments and emerge on the other side with an intact soul, perhaps even more whole than it was before, because wounded, when looked at directly and accepted completely, has a paradoxical power to heal, not heal in the sense of closure or disappear, but heal in the sense of integrating, of becoming part of who you are instead of something you carry with shame. And this integration of wound into identity is what allows you to finally stop comparing yourself, because when you completely accept your own imperfections, your own limitations, your own failures, when you stop trying to hide them or make up for them or prove that you are better despite them, when you simply accept them as part of the fabric of who you are, then comparison loses power, because you are no longer trying to be someone you are not. You are simply being who you are, wounds and all. And there is freedom in that no external achievement could ever give. Freedom from not needing to prove anything, from not needing to be special, from not needing to win, just freedom to exist, fully, completely, without reservation. And that full existence is what you were seeking all along through all those comparisons. Not proof that you are better, but permission to simply be. And permission doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from reaching standard or winning competition. It comes from within, from decision that only you can make to finally accept yourself. Not as you would like to be, but as you are. Here, now, imperfect and wonderful exactly as you are. And Simone Weil spent her entire life coming to that acceptance, fighting with her ego, resisting the need to be special. Learning to love herself not despite imperfections, but including imperfections, and she didn't have enough time to complete that journey. She died young, but she left a map, she left practices, she left words that continue to guide those who have the courage to look honestly to your own suffering and choosing to go through it rather than run away from it. You are not alone, you never have been, and pain you carry, however heavy it may be, is shaping you into something you cannot yet see, but one day will recognize. Keep looking, keep feeling, keep practicing mindfulness and presence and self-acceptance. Keep living. Because that is exactly what Simone Weil would do. She would keep going, not because she was sure of success, but because there is no real alternative when you have seen truth. You can only live by it or live in constant betrayal of yourself, and you have already chosen by getting this far. By allowing these words to touch your deepest wounds, you have already chosen truth. Now all that remains is to keep choosing, day after day, moment after moment, until choice becomes nature, until freedom to not compare becomes your normal state, and that day it will come. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but it will come, because you are on the right path, you are doing necessary work, you are looking honestly at what hurts. And that, more than any external achievement, is what transforms you, what frees you, what finally allows you to live the life that was always yours to live.